Big Brother, mainstream media, government cover-ups. You want answers? Well, so does he. He's Alex Jones on the GCN Radio Network. And now, live from Austin, Texas, Alex Jones.
It is Wednesday, June 4th, 2014. I am your host, Alex Jones, and I want to do something a little bit different in this first hour. The 25th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, when the people stood up, the anti-communist demonstrators, simply wanting to demonstrate that the government was corrupt and tyrannical and was not allowing them to vote. All they could do was watch the Central Party Committee appoint people to different positions, and the answer was to send in army tanks to run over people and shoot them. We have some of the raw footage of Tiananmen Square that they never really show on U.S. media or in Chinese news, for that matter, of the tanks running over people, of the piles of dead bodies, you name it, in my film, In-Game Blueprint for Global Enslavement, detailing that the globalists that run our country love communist China and have said that communist China is the model of the world civilization they want to build. So I want to talk about the First Amendment today, but also look at the state of the establishment, the state of the Obama administration, this Bo Bergdahl situation really blowing up in their face. Why would they do something like this when it would blow up in their face? What's the larger psyop here, or is it complete incompetence? Let me tell you, they're not incompetent when it comes to shutting down our power plants. They're not incompetent when it comes to federalizing our schools. They're not incompetent when it comes to turning different countries over to Al-Qaeda. So what's the larger issue there? It is the First Amendment. So here in the United States, it's free speech worldwide. I want to celebrate it today. In the first, second, and third hour, we do have some guests coming up. Taking calls the entire 3 hours, even though we have some guests coming up. We'll try to intersperse phone calls when David Knight is riding shotgun, to talk about the state of the press and to talk about the state of the people. We, the people, should become the press. That's why it's in the First Amendment: the right of religion, the right of free speech, the right of the press, the right to assemble, the right to petition. We exercise those muscles or we lose them. So I want to have a larger discussion about the press, the role of the press, the role of the people. And David Knight was talking yesterday when he was hosting the show after I left. And I was listening to him on the free iPhone app as I watched my children play in the pool here at the Texas Surfside and here at the Texas Beach. And he said, you know, we, the real media versus the fake media. And we're always trying to come up with a term. Mainstream media, dinosaur media is my term. Prostitute media is Gerald Salente's term. Sewer stream media, Decepticon media. The enemy media. There's a lot of different terms for it. But I think the best term is the fake media. It's beyond state-run media, because the average person doesn't really know what state-run media is. The average dumbed-down person out there doesn't know that every movie, every major TV show has a message in it, most of it globalist financed. They're not aware of that. So we're going to be expanding on that today and really calling for everyone to speak out against the fake media. And then once you use the term fake media, you can expand into state-run media for the general public that isn't awake yet. Sure, we got 20% of the public probably pretty much awake, another 30% that are somewhat awake, but half the public doesn't even know what planet they're on and are literally bots programmed by mainstream fake media. And again, I just called them mainstream media. I hope today is the day that we stop calling it mainstream media and we start calling it fake state-run media, or the globalist collaborator occupied media. It's all coming up today. Jam-packed transmission, a bunch of breaking news I haven't gotten to yet up on Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. Feds treated Black Friday boycott as terrorist threat. That's a new article. That's right. Any type of free speech is terrorism in the land of tyranny. Stay with us. It's all coming up. I'm Alex Jones, your host, Infowars.com. Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central. We are here live. I am your host, Alex Jones. Riding shotgun with us is David Knight today. And of course, I do things a little bit differently than any other radio talk show host out there. Even when I take a few weeks of vacation off a year, I like to end up doing an hour or two or three, like I did on Monday. I did 2 hours, or 2 hours and 20 minutes of my own 3-hour broadcast. And I file video reports from the road and basically work from the road. So I'll be here during the first hour today. Then David Knight will be hosting the second and third hour. Daniel Estulin, who did get Bilderberg's agenda, has an inside source. He's proven it over and over again. I have to know who one of his sources is, not the other. And we're going to recap their real agenda for the world, because we're focusing on the real shadow masters, so they're not in the shadows anymore. And then any other intel he got the week after Bilderberg. Anything he learned during Bilderberg. But that's only the first half of Estulin. The second half of Estulin, we're going to have open phones in the spirit of free speech, and the people being the press and the people asking the questions. You can ask Daniel Estulin or David Knight any questions you have in the last 30 minutes of the third hour. And in that spirit today, the 25th anniversary of the people of China, the most populous nation, 25 years ago today, trying to simply demonstrate peacefully in the Tiananmen Square, or the equivalent of, the Lincoln Memorial, like Martin Luther King did. And it took them about half a day to finally find generals from a province 300 miles away to come in with army tanks with a group that spoke even a different dialect of Chinese. They've got more than 25 major dialects. It'd be like taking folks out of California to come in and kill Texans, or sending Texans to Vermont to kill folks in Vermont. They brought in the armor. And we always see that famous photo of Tank Man, a video still that had to be smuggled out of the country later. Tank Man blocking a tank. But if you go and get the full photo of Tank Man, it shows more than 20 tanks backed up by one person. And no one knows what happened to Tank Man. Just like no one knows what happened to the unknown soldier. There's a photo. We should take a photo of it right now so we can show it on air. It's back in the back hallway, in between the shipping department, the warehouse, and the reporter area. There's a photo that my parents got when they were in Germany a few years ago, visiting family that lives over there, who's in the military. Long story short, they were over there. And it's a famous photo of when they set up Checkpoint Charlie, and weren't letting East Germans out of the country. And they would just machine gun men, women, and children, the communists would, the communist Germans. The Nazis just handed the baton off right into Soviet tyranny, so it worked perfectly, like a horse and carriage, of a East German soldier who is the 3-year-old boy, the toddler, gets tied up in the barbed wire, and that German soldier hands him across to his parents. And then he was disappeared and tortured and, we're told, killed, never to be heard from again, because he was an image of freedom and an image of humanity. And it's going to be that humanity that stops the globalists. That's why they want to go to robots, drones, automated systems, smart grids that spy on us and control us, because the globalists see us as a wild beast, 7,350,000,000 of us, that they must control, they must dumb down. And this broadcast is incontrovertibly opposed at a physical DNA level and a spiritual level against all forms of tyranny over the minds of humanity. I know that a free, open society produces the best country, the best nation, the best system. And every philosopher and historian of any worth says that's the case as well. So we know authoritarianism is not good for even the elite. We need an elite based on the fact that they're smarter, they're more intelligent, they're harder working, they're better looking, they create better literature, they're better authors, they're better lecturers, they're better scientists. And that will be an elite of every race, color, creed, and religion, and true diversity. Not an elite of centralized bankers who are using 5,000-year-old banking manipulation systems of where the money changers, the gold banks, the pawn shops of ancient Babylon and Egypt, and then right through Greece, Rome, to the goldsmiths and money changers of 500 years ago in Germany, the Rothschilds, 400 years ago, the Red Shields, where they would have 100 pieces of gold, but loan out credit for 10,000 pieces of gold on pieces of paper or tally sticks, or their seal on a letter. That's why those ink seals were so important, or the seals with the wax. You could be executed if you falsified seals or falsified signatures. You ever see Lord Monckton's signature? It's like this incredibly complex thing that would take, you 10 years to learn how to do. It's this big, perfect design. That's because your mark couldn't be copied. And you wouldn't want someone to be able to copy it. That's where all this comes from. And we need to get back to things being based on ideas and based on quality in a free market of competition. True democracy of the free market versus a democracy of tyranny where they domesticate the general public, train them to enslave the other 49%. That's why we're a republic or a limited democracy, where it doesn't matter if the mass wants to enslave one group. Everyone has unalienable, inalienable rights that cannot be changed, cannot be manipulated, even if the mass of people want to say black people aren't humans. Well, sorry, you can't do that anymore because a minority of white Christians said it was wrong. 60 years after the abolition movement started in England and the United States, slavery was outlawed in almost the entire Western world. Still ongoing in Africa and the Middle East today. But no one wants to talk about that because it doesn't fit into the whole demonization of the West program. Now, continuing, ladies and gentlemen, in that spirit of free speech and the First Amendment, I want to open the phones up throughout the full 3 hours today, except for the 30 minutes when Estulin is on by himself with Knight. And just try to take about 20 calls an hour on any subject you want to discuss. But I would like to hear from you if you would like to comment on it. But it is open phones. First time, long time, agree, disagree. I would like to hear from you out there on the nature of what the First Amendment really means. Congress shall make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or of the press, or the people's right to peaceably assemble and petition the government for a redress of grievances. I think I got it all right there. The point is, going from memory, it's all right there. It doesn't give us those rights. It points out what was already there. And so you use it or you lose it. And I know we all know that like muscles. You don't use them, you lose them, they atrophy. But I'll tell you, I didn't work out for more than 15 years and gained about 100 pounds. It's taken me 4 or 5 years of working out, changing my diet, and taking supplements. I've lost more than half of it, and I intend to lose the rest. And that's an incredible attribute of the body. I'm older, and I shouldn't be able to, reverse all I did when I was young, but I am, because that's how the body's designed if you don't turn it around too late. And it's the same thing for a country or a nation. We can turn ourselves around if we believe we can and rediscover the common sense narrative of freedom that's hiding in plain view. And the system knows a great time of change is coming and that we're at the bottom of a major decadence cycle right now. The system is aware of that. So it's moving in to try to suppress the people and admitting that on every front. They wanted to build their global tyranny, the architecture of oppression, quietly behind the scenes. But like a giant ship in a shipyard, when they finally remove the curtain and open the big gates and cut the blocks and the ship goes into the water, it's revealing itself. And the ship has been launched. The dreadnought tyranny is upon us. But it hid itself because it knows the power of the people. Cynicism, not believing in liberty, being lazy, not caring about others, thinking you get ahead by only caring about yourself is what brings down civilizations. But also caring about civilization but being manipulated into serving evil is what brings it down even faster. So it's not enough to care and be involved. You've got to be researched, and you've got to be involved in the right areas for the right causes. And the cause we're promoting is classic Americana, classic freedom, classic Renaissance, classic enlightenment, classic victory, classic success, classic chivalry, classic honor, classic truth, classic Bible, classic family, classic powerful male, powerful female role models, celebrating honor, celebrating beauty, celebrating justice, celebrating courage, celebrating being destroyed in the fight against the dragons of evil, or sometimes prevailing. But it is the great animating contest that Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington talked about that will make us or break us. So here's the toll-free number on this live Wednesday worldwide edition, 800-259-9231, 800-259-9231. And we will get you up and on the air. Again, 800-259-9231. David Knight will be popping in with some breaking news briefly at the bottom of the hour and chiming in anytime he feels like it in this hour on some of the callers we're going to be taking. Some of the news up on Infowars.com. Feds treated Black Friday boycott as terrorist threat. New documents reveal. Yeah, any form of knowing how to tie your shoelaces is terrorism. You just go watch football games, drink fluoride water, take vaccines, prepare to die of cancer. That's patriotism. Let the troops go die at the VA. Let them experiment on little black kids with pesticides till they die all over the country. No one gets in trouble. That was 8 years ago, New York, states where it broke. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian kids turn their oxygen off. Some of them died. Secret test, Joseph Mengele, don't get in trouble, federal government. National Institutes of Health. I mean, these people are demons. Not even the average cop at the Threat Fusion Center, but they're gathering data and getting used to seeing anyone who's good being listed as bad. Baltimore imposes daytime curfew on adolescents. That's right. As the society unravels, everyone will now be a criminal. They have nighttime curfews on adults in many areas of the country. Secret Service to track Twitter users in real time. Again, as if you're all terrorists. New reports. Bergdahl left note declaring intention to desert, renounce citizenship the night he walked off. I want to hear your take on Bergdahl. This is a total psyop now. There's no doubt. I want to go over a list of things on that front. The body count behind Bo Bergdahl. Excellent report by Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs for Infowars.com. It's all coming up today, but your phone calls are straight ahead. Stay with us. All right. Look, I want to go to your phone calls, or I never will. After I take some calls later in the next segment, I'm going to go over the Bo Bergdahl release that just is an absolute fraud on every front. Why would Obama do this? They know how to put out propaganda stunts. There is something going on behind this. And I haven't figured out what it is yet, but wrote a note that he was going to defect to the Akani network, all the rest of it, all these people dying trying to get him. This just has PSYOP written all over it. There's no doubt. So maybe you can give me your take on it out there, listeners, on what you think's going on. We have continual coverage at prisonplanet.com and Infowars.com on that front. Let's go to George in Connecticut. You're on the air. Thank you for calling in today.
Hi, Alex. I'm wondering if we couldn't have a story, maybe for the Europeans in particular, rebranding Bilderberg as the rise of the Nazis again, because Europeans are very sensitive to this issue, and if people realize that the same people that have promoted the Bilderberg movement are also the same people who promoted Hitler and various other things, and they start to look into this more deeply, and they wouldn't want these people on their soil. It would become like having a plague upon your soil. And I think that's an important issue because I don't think most Europeans see that yet. Some of them do, but not as a large body.
Incredible point. Appreciate your call. Just let me briefly comment on that, go to more calls. The Nazi thing's been way overplayed. That card is just, you know, don't like Obamacare, you're a Nazi. Don't turn your guns in, you're a Nazi. Don't want the borders totally open, you're a Nazi. But then if you're George Soros, a real Nazi collaborator, or Schwarzenegger, who said he admired Nazis, to Rolling Stone magazine, and reportedly wears SS uniforms at home, I mean, I'm not kidding. That's all okay. So it's purely political when MSNBC says, I'm deeply racist, and then shows no proof. It just shows how they're totally fake, state-run, anti-American, anti-freedom media. Bilderberg was founded mainly by a bunch of former Nazis with a bunch of European robber barons and British and U.S. robber barons on record in 1954. And they bragged they founded the euro and the rest of it. And it's true that it's not just the Nazis. There's always authoritarian interest who want authoritarianism to be able to take over a society. Joseph Mengele's family was royal. The royal family got behind Hitler in Germany because they lost the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And it's not that the Germans were the bad guys. The globalists were manipulating both sides, and that's been declassified. The British intelligence was actually helping fund a bunch of radical groups, the communists and the Nazis early on in the 20s and 30s. Because they want to destabilize things, just like they give arms to Assad and to al-Qaeda now to destabilize Syria. So it's the same story over and over again. And the EU project was a Hitler-Nazi project. That's even in the BBC. And it was done by stealth, and they couldn't win with tanks, so they won with an economic takeover. But it's beyond the Nazis. It's financial interests that want authoritarianism. And now, look, we're going under the Asian trade unions and the rest of it. All of our rights are being taken under it. Internet rights, you name it. There's not even discussion in the media. Just like there's not discussion of Bilderberg in the controlled corporate press. Because people don't know there's a Pacific trade deal being done right now with 30 points. Only 2 of them have been leaked that are just freedom ending. We got the Copenhagen carbon tax treaty, so the whole thing fell apart. Just because we got the treaty. But we can't get the treaties. That's how much tyranny we're under. Let's jam in one more. David in Wisconsin. You're on the air. Thanks for calling.
Hey, Alex. Big fan of your show. I have a pretty simple question. My grandpa asked me, because I was talking about stuff you talk about and trying to wake him up, trying to wake up my family and all that. And he asked me, well, what is it that I can do, my generation can do? And he's 70 years old, so that's, pretty old. He says, what can he do to help wake people up? What is it he can do right now?
He can learn about the New World Order. He can understand there's more media than just the mainstream dinosaur media. He can get involved. He can run for city council. He can go out and read the Bill of Rights and Constitution and then look around him and see what's wrong. And then he can decide how to get involved. Good people all have to do just a little bit. It'll bring down the tyranny. The problem is good people become spectators, believing that they have no basic power. Great question. All right, we're off to the races. 2 callers down. I want to take 20 calls in the 30 minutes we've got left in this hour. When we come back, and David and I will be popping in as well. We've got more on the Bergdahl situation. We are now living the 1984 reality, but there's the old parallel liberties of private property, family, guns, male and female roles. Top globalists back in 1961, before he died, published Brave New World Revisited. Aldous Huxley, at the time his brother ran the UN, the real UN, the scientific end of it, scientific technocracy, eugenicist end of it. He was the head of the World Eugenics Society, by the way, at the time, and that was Julian Huxley. And he gave an hour-long speech at Berkeley that we've played the whole thing of here multiple times over the last 18, 19 years on air. And in that speech, he said, look, I debated my colleague, Eric Blair, George Orwell, as his pen name, and I said, it will not be the boot stamping in the black uniform. That's waiting in the wings for those in the first few phases that resist. No, it will be being brought to puberty at age 8, and population reduction. Brave New World is the model. My book, published in 1932, is not so much a science fiction book as it is our plan for the world. And you will love your servitude and your destruction and your enslavement. Ah. And the people at Berkeley are clapping. Ah, oh, we'll get to rule over the program. And they put fluoride in our water to brain damage us and dumb us down. We're becoming infertile. People are going into puberty when they're 8 now. And, the plan's going quite well. They're feeding us GMO. And again, I'm not being negative. I've been down here in Port Aransas fishing and with my children. We're not into fancy vacations. They just like, just the Texas beach, swimming in the pool and stuff. And I've run into, let's not exaggerate. Let's not exaggerate. The manager of the condos we're staying at's a listener. Half the lifeguards are listeners. It's a giant pool, the biggest down here. And I've run into I'd say half of the middle-aged men I walk by are listeners. The people at the restaurant are listeners. And it's just everywhere I go, people are listeners. And then they say, what do we do? I mean, you are the majority. And I'm not even bragging. I mean, when a 18-year-old female lifeguard knows who I am and says that her dad listens and she listens, I mean, the New World Order is in trouble. I'm not bragging, ooh, I'm a celebrity. I don't like being this popular going up against the globalist. They're trying to indict Steve Pieczenik, that's on record, for running CIA operations in the 80s that were sanctioned mainly because he comes on this show, and he's been told don't come on this show. MI6 has visited him, and he's had a bunch of stuff happen. I mean, that's how real this is, folks, that I have to deal with my guests being murdered, like the D.C. Madam and others. I have to deal with being physically attacked before. And I'm not saying boo-hoo, woe is me. Do you realize, folks, that I'm in combat in the info war, toe-to-toe with the globalist? and their dirty tricks and all the rest of it, because they can track with Google and the NSA the fact that our audience, they know how big our audience is, we don't. They've got a better handle on it. I don't have all the systems to know how many people listen. I know it's about 20 million that we can track each week. Do you think they like that? I want to go back to your calls. It's just that they've got war games, computer algorithms now where they can tell what things will tend to do politically off of similar things they've done before. They can almost predict the future, but they can't predict you wild carding and as an individual not following their programming. And those two nexus points are coming together right now. We're at the flashpoint. Here are some of the headlines, and then I'll go to your phone calls and get any comments David Knight has on this. Let me pull up Drudge. I just had Drudge. Drudge, I think, has the best coverage of the Bergdahl situation. We can put it up on screen for TV viewers. Video, Bergdahl's release. We can show some of that in the background. Report, had been made to look ill. Report, wanted to renounce citizenship. Team leader, a lot more to the story than soldier walking away. My gut tells me he was sheep-dipped, and this was super elaborate, and that's why he has such courage, they say, and all the rest of it. I mean, I think they're really trying to fool the Akani network. 3 more members of Bergdahl's platoon speak out. White House apologizes for oversight and congressional notification. It's an oversight when the law says 30-day notification. Just like getting rid of your Bill of Rights and Constitution's an oversight, and signing statements are an oversight, and saying NATO's over our military is an oversight, and doubling your health care costs is an oversight. Miscalculated reaction. Who wrote Rice's talking points this time? Ranking dim, dangerous precedent that puts all Americans at risk. Yeah, it does. Rubio, Obama believes he's become monarch or emperor. Law professor, President Nixon always wanted to be what President Obama has become. Again, why do you have Rubio, this neocon, golden boy? We don't need a gimmick to get a libertarian or constitutionalist elected, so we run a Hispanic. I'd vote for Hispanic in a minute if they were like Ted Cruz, and I would vote for Ted Cruz for president. But it doesn't mean it's because he's Hispanic I would vote for him, or has a Hispanic Spanish last name. It's because he can do a 28-hour filibuster. He's fought Obamacare. He's fought for the Second Amendment. They would have passed gun control if it wasn't for Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and the American people. Okay, I'm ranting. I said I'd take calls. The point is we don't need gimmicks, but why is Rubio talking like that now? He's got to sound like a libertarian constitutionalist like Ted Cruz or Rand Paul to win. The answer is radicalize the libertarian arm of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is ready to fall to the liberty movement. They admit that. They're panicking. All hands on deck with the Democrats and Republican leadership trying to kill the Tea Party. That's why I'm full in to the Tea Party, the real Tea Party, to take over the Republicans. That's our shot. 2014 is everything. But now you notice we got called kooks saying he was becoming a dictator just 3 years ago. Now it's, oh yeah, he's becoming a dictator. It's passé, Democrats, Republicans, because we're the majority. We've told the truth. What we said is coming true. They have Democrats have websites saying that, I mean, every day, I saw 2 of them yesterday without looking. Alex Jones is crazy. He says Obama's becoming a dictator. Oh, he's so kooky. Ah, ha, ha. Look at him. That's so weak-minded people read that and think, ah, ha, ha. The military is going to be on the streets. Obama's becoming a dictator. How funny. They're literally just using peer pressure with mindless Democrats that can't even tie their shoelaces. I mean, I'm a liberal, okay? I want more freedom. You are fascist scumbags. There are a lot of well-meaning liberals who are freaked out by Obama, and they don't trust the Republicans either. I don't either. But when the whole leadership is after the real Tea Party, you better believe they know that's where the opposition is. Will they try to co-opt it? Will there be problems? Of course there will be. But the Tea Party's not going to come after getting rid of the borders completely and legalize 30 million more illegals and take our guns and you know, openly fund Al-Qaeda and you know, say our kids belong to the state. I mean, this is Mao Zedong level what's going on. They're just attempting to normalize a total takeover. All right, I'm going to go to your phone calls. Just please remember, we have the very best nascent iodine out there. The new X2 is beyond even the previously best, which was still available and good for kids and things. It's not as strong, more palatable. That's the regular survival shield that's done wonders for myself. The new X2, ladies and gentlemen, is from crystals. Nobody else has this source. It's other seaweed-based. This is multi-million-year-old ancient crystals from an ancient sea mined between 7 and 10,000 feet, and it goes right into the bloodstream, right into the body, detoxifying. What it's done for me is just incredible. I've been on it a couple months before it officially came out, and people can just see the difference in my skin, my energy. I mean, I work a lot harder than I used to. I have more stamina. I chalk it up 2x2 in the regular survival shield, the super male vitality, and the super female vitality that will sell out in the next few days. We've got an additional 900 bottles or so. It had sold out as of Monday. We have an additional 900 bottles. You've heard the rave reviews. And regardless, you're funding our operation, InfoWarsLife.com or 888-253-3139. And I want to thank you all for your support and for getting the great products at InfoWarsLife.com, InfoWarsStore.com. Okay, David Knight, tell us what's coming up in the second and third hour today, and then I want to race through phone calls right into the next hour. I want you to continue with these calls.
Well, Alex, we're going to talk about the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square because, you know, CNN is patting itself on the back, talking about the CNN effect, how it was a watershed moment for CNN. And really, we want to compare what they did with the CNN coverage of Tiananmen Square to what CNN did when we had the standoff at the Nevada ranch, in Bunkerville, the Bundy Ranch.
Perfect. Show the footage of you and Josh valiantly walking up as they were threatening to shoot you, and then tie it into Ceausescu. People hailed the folks overthrowing them. You didn't overthrow anybody. You just stood up against thugs threatening you, and you're being called a terrorist by Harry Reid.
That's right, Alex. And, you know, we see that there's a CNN reporter who was just arrested in Turkey for covering anti-government distress there. That was a very brave thing that he did, and they allowed that to go through. That was a good thing. But, you know, at the same time, remember that Amber Lyons reports about what was going on, essentially identical to that, anti-government protests in Bahrain. They shut down her report. So what does it tell us about the controlled media? And when we look back at 25 years from China, what have we learned about how China, the Chinese government, has controlled information about Tiananmen Square today?
And China, the globalists in Australia and the U.S. and Russia admit the Chinese model of censorship is the model. We've got to study it. Incredible job. Look forward to those special reports coming up and phone calls in the next 2 hours. And Daniel Estulin. Thank you so much, David Knight.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, now I've been bad. Please don't ask me thought-provoking questions. It gets me off on a jag. Let's go to your calls. Jay Lynn in Texas, thanks for calling. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Okay, first point, what Ted Cruz did, it was not a filibuster. Well, it technically was, but they didn't count it as one because they were already scheduled to rule on the vote at a certain time period, so everybody got to call him out.
But a rose is a rose by any other name.
Second point was that Rachel Carson was promoted on Google Doodle because she made a book that influenced the environmental movement, and it was about banning DDT, which resulted in millions and millions, hundreds of millions of lives.
They admit about 3 million people die a year from DDT, but they say it's a price worth it, and it really didn't hurt the birds as bad as they said. It was a magical pesticide that helped humans not die of malaria. You're absolutely right.
Right. And third point, newsrescue.com promotes some of your stuff. I read some very interesting information that people don't promote. They want guns in their area, in Nigeria, to protect themselves from the government and from these military groups, because both of them are coinciding with each other. Some of them are
people want guns in Mexico to protect themselves. People want it in Africa. God bless you. Great points. Yeah, the only states that have any law and order in Mexico are where the Mexican farmers and ranchers, people close to the earth, it doesn't matter if it's leftists in Chiapas or right-wing Mormon Christians in the northern Mexico, they get illegal guns in Texas and other places that are single shot and semi-auto. They lower the crime. They stop the cartels. And the Mexican government's having to back off now and saying, okay, let them be armed. So the only time you have nightmare extermination is when the state and the criminals have guns. When the people have the guns, the state and the criminals behave themselves. Because when the government fears the people, there is liberty. When the people fear the government, there is tyranny. Thomas Jefferson. Let's talk to Mike in Louisiana. You're on the air.
Thank you, Alex. While I was waiting online, the 5 bottle of X2 was delivered to me, and it's sitting in front of me. I can't wait to open it up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the support, sir. We couldn't do it without you.
Yes, sir. This is Mike from New Orleans that has the cart on the street. I want to thank you again for promoting that. It was a nice little boost. I still don't have the screens, but I still soon will, and we'll be able to live stream your show out to the French Quarter every day.
I want to say this. This is how the CIA would overthrow what they call dictatorships until they changed their policy in the 50s and started putting dictatorships in, or in the 60s mainly. They would have people go around with handouts, bicycles, and then sandwich boards with messages, and enough of them, it would overthrow the regime. What you're doing with your bicycle with these big boards in New Orleans, if other people just did it an hour a week and put up handouts and just spread the word and called into talk radio and called into C-SPAN, enough of a buzz, we would overthrow the globalists very quickly.
Can I read you something I blogged yesterday in answer to what can we do? And this is what I blogged. They only are granted the power we give them, and we could start taking it away in a million ways right now, letting them know for our voices, our purses, and our passion. Peaceful civil disobedience is now our duty. If you've never emailed your rage, start now. If you've never called, call. If you've never written, write. If you've never spoken out, now is the time to yell. If for some reason you can't make yourself visible but still want to help and contribute to those that are putting themselves on the front lines in any way you can. If they want a revolution, that by God will give them one, but one on our terms. One that will be a revolution where the power of love will overcome the of power. Start now. Make a pledge. Say this is it. Call it the Howard Beale Pledge. Tell them you're mad as hell and you're not going to take it anymore.
Well, very well said. God bless you, sir. Appreciate the call. I have told the crew, the great Darren McBreen, the great Rob Dew, and others, I want a promo made, but I should come back and tape it and, you know, rant with a call to action, have clips of Howard Beale saying, I'm mad as hell, I'm not going to take it anymore, and call it the Howard Beale Pledge to get aggressive, to not back down, and promote the ideas of liberty. And that's what it takes, because our country was so wealthy, so free, it took so long to dismantle it, but now they're getting down to the final nuts and bolts. Great points. Matt in Tennessee, listening on WBCR 1470. You're on the air. Go ahead, Matt.
Hey, guys. Jens, Alex, appreciate you letting me on. You sound racist because you don't like Tiananmen Square. This bird dog guy, I think this could come back to get us. I don't know if I'm thinking way outside the box here, but his parents, his dad, seems to have a lot of knowledge with those people over there. Maybe they let him go and they let them 5 prisoners go, that maybe they're going to try to do a false flag here in the next couple of years to keep Obama in. He can set out martial law and then no election, and then he can stay in. What do you think about that?
I know we have pieces of the puzzle, and any way you slice it, this is staged. Nobody would do what Obama did. It's a PR disaster unless there's something larger. And I think it was just like Red Adair would blow up oil wells that were on fire with a bigger explosion. I think they did this in an emergency because they could track the VA thing was going to boil over, as a way to give a fake defeat of Obama and to change the subject. That could be part of it. You have the CIA section chief blown, so it's probably coming out that Bergdahl was a fake defector. I'm speculating here. But you add to this, I'm just throwing the pieces out, that he really did defect. He did walk off base. That was known. Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs called me Saturday, and McAdoo called me, Leanne, and they were already on that before it was on CNN a day and a half later. So this was well known. This does not add up at any level. And then you see shows like Homeland and others with the narrative that fit this Bergdahl thing exactly. They want the background of the idea that troops are Al-Qaeda. Troops are Al-Qaeda. Troops are Al-Qaeda to flip Homeland Security on their #1 enemy, the veterans. So this is a major sophisticated PSYOP. I haven't ferreted it out exactly. We just know it's a PSYOP. Stay there, caller. I want to finish up with you.
About tyranny.
Look, it's simple. If you don't value your freedom and you think your freedom is having checkpoints on the highway, you're going to be a slave. And they've changed the laws, the regulations to take your bank accounts, to track everything you do. We're going into tyranny. Tyranny kills prosperity. And we're seeing our prosperity go out the window right now. Matt in Tennessee, any other points you want to make about the Bo Bergdahl story that is just disintegrating? And we were reporting on it Sunday that it was disintegrating. People were like, oh, come on, not a conspiracy theory. And all the controlled fascist press that poses as left-wing was attacking us on Monday. They're not laughing now, are they?
No, they're definitely not laughing. And what's this secret meeting with the Senate today, behind closed doors meeting going on about this whole prisoner exchange and all that? There's something secretive about this, Alex. And I just want to say I really appreciate you being on up here in Alcoa, and also now that you're on down in Knoxville, Tennessee on 94.3, and get to listen to you every evening as well as every day up here. I really appreciate all that you do. Alex, thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you. You guys are right there in the same area of Tennessee where you had the overthrow of the corrupt government there, the Battle of Athens. We should do a special report on the Battle of Athens and really remember how that's another model that if they keep starting physical attacks with us, that we have a right and a duty to get physical. I don't want that to happen, but it is our right and our duty. And that's why they're trying to demonize the Declaration of Independence right now. Let's go to Kevin in Canada. Kevin, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, hello. Alex?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm up here in Alberta, Canada. I'm just amazed at what's going on. I don't know where to start here. I'd actually just like to ask you if there's anything you could do with David Icke and Jesse Ventura, get them both on the same page, or try and get a roundtable discussion with them to get them, I don't know, to cooperate or something a little more. I know that Jesse doesn't like to go into that stuff, but I believe it.
Well, I mean, listen, I can barely run my own life. I like David Icke and I'm friends with him. I like Jesse Ventura and I'm friends with him. I admire and think both men are very interesting. I know them both personally over many years. You're talking about one of the TV shows. I was in like 12 episodes of 3 seasons and was a consultant on conspiracy theory. Ventura quit the show because he didn't like the direction it was going. I was pretty much offered the show. I turned it down. Great people involved in it. It's just the network was turning it into chupacabras and space aliens, and we didn't want to go that route. Now I do a show on History Channel and Discovery Channel, Book of Secrets and one other. I don't even watch those shows. I know with the Ventura show, they kind of edited what I said down to make it look like I was attacking Ike. I'm not mad at him. I don't want to get in the middle of it. I've tried to get the two together, but Ike totally misunderstood what was happening. With reality TV, they didn't want them to meet beforehand. It took him an hour to get stuff ready. He thought they were putting him off on purpose. And the two guys are both real, and they're both, former, athletes. And Ventura was a champion swimmer and other stuff. And they just, two alpha males got in a literal argument, on air and off air. And there's nothing I can do about it. And that's what happened. And I just feel bad about the whole thing. But that's already like 2 years ago and water under the bridge. I mean, what, did they just re-air that or something on True TV? Because why do you bring it up?
I've just got a memory like an elephant. I think you three are basically the most powerful people in the truth movement with the widest audiences, and I think you guys need to get together.
Well, I'll say this. I think Ike's on next week, and I want to get Ventura back on. So we'll just, you know what? I could reach out to him and say, let's all do a friendly interview. But I don't want to plan that yet, so don't go after that yet, Network. I want to wait on that. Next hour coming up, we'll do 5 more minutes to introduce David Knight. And then I will punch out and he'll take over. We're going to talk to John, Chad, Jason, Will, and others. Stay with us. First Amendment Day.
I don't know.
We're seeing the precedent set for total governmental lawlessness right now. And that's an understatement. With the NSA, with the checkpoints, with the TSA, with the NATO being over our military for 4 years and Obama telling Congress go to hell, with the illegals being legalized who have felonies by the tens of thousands. 36,000 in one swath 2 weeks ago. Obama saying I'll release terrorists whenever I want and violate federal law. It is unprecedented, and even mainline Rubio and mainline Democratic law professors are on Infowars.com, DrudgeReport.com today, and David Knight's coming up, he'll cover it all, saying, yeah, this is dictatorship. But see, it's more sophisticated. Obama will leave office. I predict he will leave office in 2 years. I don't know, it's getting worse than I say sometimes. I mean, I underestimate. They could nuke cities. He says the number one thing he's worried about is nukes going off. He doesn't know who's going to do it. Army soldiers with Al-Qaeda, they've been floating in TV shows and movies and in mainstream TV news. So I guess they're pre-programming. They could do it, but I don't think so. The point is they want the bureaucracy to be a dictatorship, the bureaucracy to be dictatorial. See, they don't need the puppet to stay in, folks. They're setting the precedent to use our Constitution like toilet paper. Let's go to John in Wisconsin. Then David Knight's going to come back, and I want to get his take I'll be gone, but I want his take on this journey to train us to be under dictatorship and why they want to demonize the real press, and then he's going to take your calls. David Knight waiting in the wings, about to take the baton. John in Wisconsin, thanks for holding. Go ahead.
Yeah, Alex, how's your holiday holding up?
You know, I've just learned that all work and no play makes Jack not be good. So Jack will be taking more holidays than 2 weeks a year like I usually do to be with my children, but I will be working, and it seems like I get more done when I do take off than when I just keep coming into the office 6-7 days a week. So it's going very well, and I just feel reborn every time I take a few days off.
Well, you got a wonderful staff there. You should be able to relax a little bit once in a while, you know. But anyhow,
that was the plan. That was the plan. In case they kill me, the plan is to actually have people in place. Go ahead.
Well, what I was going to call about is this prisoner exchange. You know, this was fabricated, and it was rolled out on purpose, and it could be the false flag that you've been talking about. You know, I don't think they're going to do a nuclear strike or anything like that because that kind of ruins the territory, you know. And they want territory, so it's got to be this. Not only that, the thing with the VA, it's been like that all the time ever since it was instituted by design.
I agree with you, and everybody I've talked to, or family or doctors that have worked in them have told me the same thing. But it's undoubtedly, from every vet I've talked to, gotten the worst they've ever seen under Obama. Do you agree with that statement or disagree?
Yeah, I do, but you have to understand where Obama came from. Both VA hospitals in Chicago are on the corrupt list, and they've always been that way. Hines and Woods. And neither one of them had ever improved much, and there's always been rumors of deaths and overcrowding and not getting in and all kinds of stuff. So
oh, yeah, no. They're a beta test of death list. They're a beta test of unplugging people. They're a beta test of the death panels. I mean, this is our future. And it's all just how to manage it and get away with it. While they worship the vets to trick young people to join, while they act like they're so patriotic to get reflected glory in the government, they literally, Homeland Security admits, veterans are their enemy. They're going to blow stuff up and blame it on the vets. They're coming for the vets. It's outrageous. And if we let a bunch of communists and foreign bankers get away with this, we deserve it. I don't think they're going to get away with it, John. What do you think?
I don't think so either, because now that it's so widely in everybody's mind and everything, something's going to be done. It's going to be done because...
Absolutely. Look, they've gone too far. It's pathological now. I can feel it in my gut. We're turning the corner. Pray, folks. We'll be back with David Knight. Stay with us.
Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. I'll be finishing the program today. We're going to be taking your calls. We're going to go to Chad in South Carolina in just a minute. But before we do, I want to have a little bit different perspective on what's going on with Bergdahl. People are questioning what his motives were, which side he was on. They're talking about the release of the prisoners. But I want to focus on the fact that Obama clearly broke the law. How many times are we going to allow this to happen without taking action? Even Dianne Feinstein is talking about Obama breaking the law now. Now, I know that when we get rid of Obama, there's going to be somebody just like him or just as bad, perhaps even worse, to take his place. They've got plenty of clones of Obama waiting in the wings to take his place. But how long are we going to allow our highest government officials to thumb their noses at the law? Now, this is what Democrat Dianne Feinstein said today. She said, "It comes to us with some surprise and dismay that the transfers went ahead with no consultation, totally not following the law." That's from townhall.com. They report that. Totally not following the law. That's Dianne Feinstein. So if he's like totally not following the law, dude, can we impeach him, get rid of him, replace him with somebody else? I mean, even Joe Biden. It would at least be a warning. It would at least be a movement in the right direction. This comes 2 days after Jeffrey Toobin, a Harvard professor, someone who identifies with the Democratic Party, someone who's not necessarily as linked into it as Dianne Feinstein, but clearly that's his point of view. He was asked on CNN by Wolf Blitzer. He says, you've looked at the law, you've looked at the signing statement, you've gone through it, said Blitzer. Did the president break the law? And he was kind of surprised when Toobin said, Yes, I think he clearly broke the law. Here's the deal. The law says 30 days notice. He didn't give 30 days notice. It's that simple. There isn't any way that you can spin this. He didn't give 30 days notice. Now, Obama, is being reported, declined to give a 30-day notice. Or, as the White House says, he waived it because this guy Bergdahl was supposedly in immediate danger. Really? Really? Can you make the case for that? This is what Tubin said. He said, it's true he issued signing statements, but signing statements are not law. It's the president's opinion about what the law should mean. Now, it may be that the law is unconstitutional. It may be that the law is a violation of his power as commander-in-chief, but no court has held that. The law is on the books. He didn't follow the law. And then Blitzer says, well, you realize, of course, you're accusing the president of the United States of breaking the law. He says, well, I don't think the president's too worried about what I think about this. You know what? The president isn't too worried about what anybody thinks about this, whether anybody thinks he's breaking the law. That's what makes this all so dangerous. That's why we continue to head down this path, just like the NDAA, where the president signs that he believes that he has authority to indefinitely detain anyone using the U.S. military, that he can transport anyone using the military. And, of course, that has been approved by, guess what? The Republicans as well. It's not just an Obama thing. It's not just a Democrat thing. They couldn't pass the NDAA and these statements that were put in there about suspending due process. They couldn't have passed that without the Republicans in the House. So the Republicans in the House don't have a problem with that either. That's the big problem for us. Now, at the bottom of the hour, we're going to talk about the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. But just as a teaser, I want to give you this. This is a statement that Kit Daniels handed out to me. This is from a PBS Frontline story about 8 years ago in 2006. They interviewed a Chinese journalist who was there at the massacre. One of the things she said that I thought was interesting was she said, we passed out copies of the famous picture. That would be the tank man, the guy standing in front of the column of tanks. We passed out pictures of copies of that famous picture to undergraduates at Beijing University. That's where the activism started. And these undergraduate students today at Beijing University were genuinely mystified. One of them said, I don't know, maybe it's a parade or something. Another one said very politely, may I ask, is this a piece of your artwork? How has the regime succeeded in wiping out recent history? Well, we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about some interviews with some of the people who were in the military at that time. I want to get a perspective of the people who were in the military. Think about the guy in the tank, not just about the guy in front of the tank. The guy in front of the tank was amazingly courageous. He had no reason to believe that these guys wouldn't just run him down. And it's a good thing that the guys in the tank that day didn't do it. But eventually, they did. Eventually, they fired on the crowd. What was it that changed? How did the Chinese government manipulate the troops in the days leading up to this? Because this is not a one-day event. This is something like Waco that began back in the middle of April, if I believe correctly, if I remember correctly, and it went to the beginning of June. So this is something that developed over a period of about 6 weeks or so. And during that period of time, how did the Chinese government control the Chinese military to get them from respecting human rights and human life enough that they would not run over a man who was standing in front of them as protest? How did they go from that to a situation where these guys would not only fire on unarmed civilians, but that they would bayonet them as well? And we also have a clip from a man who was there 25 years ago, and he was also in Boston a year ago. And when he was in Boston a year ago, April 19th, to celebrate Patriots Day there, he had something very interesting to say about the difference between armed demonstrators and unarmed demonstrators. And we've seen that over and over again since I've been here at InfoWars, and I saw it at the Bundy Ranch standoff. So I want to talk about the difference in the way CNN covered the Tiananmen Square standoff. I want to talk about the way they covered the Bundy Ranch standoff, the difference in the way they covered this recent case of anti-government activity, the anti-government demonstrations in Turkey, and the CNN correspondent that was arrested there for covering it. And then the way the same network, CNN, shut down Amber Lyon when she exposed the same type of activity in Bahrain, the way they censored her. They can sometimes be very real, but sometimes they can be very fake. If you remember the Iraq War and how you had the fake footage of the correspondents putting on the gas mask, it was really pretty comical. We've got that footage. Maybe we'll show that to you as B-roll for those of you watching it. But they can be real, and they can be really fake. So we're going to talk about that later on. But let's go to some of your calls right now. Let's go to, let's see, who did I have? Chad in South Carolina. Chad?
Hello, Mr. Knight.
Hey, how you doing?
Very good. I actually called in about the Federal Reserve Bank, but I wanted to comment on the Bordeaux in Tiananmen Square. Sorry.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Now I guess they'll close Gitmo, or Obama will finally close Gitmo. We see why it's been open for so long. And then on the Tiananmen Square, it'd be good if y'all can get an uncropped photo of the famous photo. I remember Alex Jones saying one time that those tanks go on for miles. It's not just like 3 tanks.
Yeah.
And then about the Federal Reserve Bank, it is a private bank, right? It's a private company?
Yes, absolutely.
Are they a monopoly?
Yes, they are a monopoly.
Have no competition.
That's right.
So like AT&T, and when they were a monopoly and they were broke down. Okay. So I wonder why like the Koch brothers and Donald Trump or somebody doesn't get together and compete with them. Maybe that's our like...
Well, there was a Federal Reserve Act that was passed in 1913. That was manipulated by J.P. Morgan. He had manipulated a panic earlier before that. J.P. Morgan and other bankers got together ostensibly to keep from having any more bank panics, any more runs on the banks. And so they created the Federal Reserve System. It's a Federal Reserve Act. So essentially it's an act of the government creating that private monopoly. It is not essentially anymore, as people have said, it's no more federal than Federal Express, but they do have a monopoly on that. And of course, there's many aspects that we could talk about that. I would suggest that you take a look at a report that I did back at the 100th anniversary of the Federal Reserve. Was just this last December. And I did a report called It's a Wonderful Lie, and I kind of compared the way in It's a Wonderful Life, the way the banker in that movie manipulated a bank panic, the way he was driven to take over everything in that small town. I compared that to the history of the Federal Reserve. That was censored very quickly by YouTube, even though the entire movie, It's a Wonderful Life, was up on YouTube and has been up there for a couple of years and has had about 1 million views. They took down my political commentary that was just a few clips and my comments about it. They took that down, claiming copyright violation. That tells us where we are headed with CISPA, SOPA, ACTA, PIPA, these different means of censorship that are masquerading as copyright protection. The fact that they can take something down without any due process, without you having a chance to have your say-so about that. And that's something that we're going to be talking about later when we talk about the media. Thank you, Chad. Let's go to Will in Texas. Will?
David, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear. Go ahead.
Hey, pleasure speaking with you. This summer is my 14th year as an info warrior, so
great.
It's a huge pleasure, speaking with you. Maybe I don't listen every day, but I listen regularly. I'm not sure if you've covered this there at InfoWars. My brother is a Border Patrol agent in South Texas at the largest checkpoint, one of the largest checkpoints in the U.S., and he sent me a photo yesterday of just ranks of families coming from Mexico. And, I support immigration. I'm immigrating out of the United States myself, and so I'm going through an immigration process. So I respect them. He tells me that there are so many immigrants coming across that they're giving them notice to appear paperwork and then buying them a bus ticket anywhere inside the United States. And that's been going on for almost 2 months, that they're just shipping them into the United States, just rank after rank of families. So I just wanted to let you guys know, and I'm trying to get some documentation so I can send it to Show Tips so you have some actual memos or something to work with. But if anyone else out there wants to cover that or look into it, that'd be awesome.
Well, it truly is amazing, but it is also part of this globalist agenda. Throughout Europe, they have the Eurosceptic parties have been pushing back against the financial control. We're just talking, this last caller had questions about the Federal Reserve and central banks. What they were trying to do was enforce centralized global control through a currency, but another part of that was through uncontrolled immigration. Nowhere have they done that more so than in the United States. We simply cannot have open borders and a welfare state. It will bankrupt the country, but that's what they desire to do. They want to bankrupt the country and push us into competing groups that they can control, pitting one group against another. Stay tuned, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. We're going to be taking your calls. I wanted to give you a little bit of news, though, before I go to Al in Maryland. This is a story up from Paul Joseph Watson today. Secret Service to track Twitter users in real time. The federal agency will use a tool to send notification to users. This is from a request to purchase software, so we can learn from this, as Paul Joseph Watson has done so many times, this excellent research, looking through what the federal government is proposing to buy, finding out the capabilities and that they're looking for, the specifications, and we can see then what they're planning to do. Now, in this particular case, on this solicitation that was posted this week, the Secret Service announced that it intends to use the tool to undertake, listen to this, sentiment analysis, influencer identification. In other words, where are they getting their information? How do they feel about things? Access to their historical Twitter data, the ability to detect sarcasm. Oh, that would be good if they could start to learn how to do that. And heat maps that will show user trends. Not only that, but they're going to be able to send notification to users. So in case you're not intimidated enough by knowing that the government is watching and listening to everything you're doing, they can send you a direct notification to tell you and to intimidate you. But I want to go back to this thing about their ability to detect sarcasm. If you remember, it was back in 2012 that they had a story about a couple of British travelers who were coming to America, and they tweeted that they were going to destroy America. In other words, a slang for partying, and that they were going to go to Hollywood Boulevard in L.A. That's where they were traveling. And they were going to dig up Marilyn Monroe. Well, it appears that they're going to have to make this software a lot smarter than the current live agents who are working for the TSA, for Homeland Security, for the Secret Service, because these guys really believed that they were not only these two, a guy and a girl, that they were going to destroy America. That was their intention. And as part of that, I guess they were going to dig up Marilyn Monroe. And as they point out, Marilyn Monroe is entombed in a stone crypt, so they were going to need more than just a shovel. But these guys were interrogating them, wanted to know where their shovels were. They took them away, handcuffed, and took them to a jail in L.A., kept them in separate cells for 12 hours, interrogated them, and then eventually deported them. So hopefully when the Secret Service starts tracking all these Twitter feeds, they will be a little bit more intelligent than their actual agents. Don't hold your breath. We're going to see what happens with that. Let's go to Al in Maryland. Al?
Afternoon.
Hey, how you doing?
Afternoon, Dave. I'm going to get to my point, ladies and gentlemen. We're living in 1939 Eastern Europe at this time. It is very important for people to understand that Area 51 was all Tesla. Everything that you're holding in your hands is weaponized. All smart appliances, everything has been weaponized. I personally believe that chemtrails are turning the oceans and all waters into battery acid, etc. I believe we're going to have a July 1st cyber attack, which is going to move us into the cashless society. They're running curfews in Baltimore right now, and that's your cue. When they start running these curfews, and I mean on regular folks, this is your cue to understand they're going to roll out something serious. I believe the bankers jumped from wherever the hell they jumped from, and 23 bankers, top echelon. I believe that Obama is being run by the Umbra. I do not believe that he's any kind. We know who he is, do we not?
Well, you know, Al, I agree that they are planning for something. We see this with everything that they're doing. I believe that their time frame is still 2020, 2025, unless that happens. I mean, that's an approximate time frame that they're looking for. And I think it's kind of interesting that no matter what they say about the future, they have stuck to this time frame, even as we get closer to it. So now we're about 6 to 10 years away from that time frame. They keep sticking to that. I believe that they understand, as I've said before, that not only does history rhyme, but it also has a rhythm. That's something that Strauss and Howe talked about in a book called The Fourth Turning. They believe that we're coming up to a crisis event. This is a book that originally they wrote a book called Generations in 1991. They repeated it in 1997 called The Fourth Turning. They were a little bit more specific about that, focusing at that time on what they thought was going to be about 10 years away, an event about 2007, 2008 that they said was going to really shake the core of society, start to set in motion things that are going to ultimately result in some kind of a massive transformation of society. And I believe that the elites who are planning these things, the people who are at Bilderberg, the people who are operating the United States government at their behest, they're aware of this timing. They are planning for this. They're planning for major social unrest. We need to look at it. And as the previous caller that was talking to Alex said, we need to know the power of love that can overcome the love of power. We need to make our own plans for liberty. And part of that is keeping information free. When we come back right after the break, we're going to talk about what has happened in China for the last 25 years in suppressing what happened at Tiananmen Square. So stay with us. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I'm going to be here the rest of the hour. We're going to have Daniel Estulin with us in the next hour, and we're going to talk to him. This is somebody, we're focusing on freedom of speech and the importance of a free press. And Daniel Estulin is somebody who has been fighting against the suppression of information as far as Bilderberg goes. He's been fighting against that for decades. So we want to get his comments on that, and we're going to be talking to him. But in this next sector, I want to talk about what happened at Tiananmen Square in the preceding 25 years. You know, when this happened at Tiananmen Square, they had a lot of American icons, quotes. They even had a Statue of Liberty there. 1776 has inspired a lot of people around the world. We were in Copenhagen. People there were saying that they were bemoaning the fact that in Copenhagen, they didn't have any founders who were saying the kinds of things about individual liberty that we had in America. And even though our Constitution is being subverted, they said that's a very powerful thing that you can go back and fall back on that. You know, we have a product line called Made in 1776. It's one way that you can stand with us and stand behind us so that we can go to these places and report on these things. You can find that at InfoWarsStore.com. It's all made in America. We've got competitive prices there. We've got things like caps and belt buckles, which I personally like to take with me whenever I go anywhere because I love the idea that this revolution, that freedom, that the principles that we have go back to 1776. And as we've said over and over again, that is the answer to the Orwellian 1984 state that they are building. But we have men's and ladies' lines of garments, again, that's made in America. It's one way that you can patriotically support our operation here, as well as businesses in the United States that are making this. It's not being shipped out to China. So please consider that. That's Made in 1776 line at InfoWarsStore.com. Now, on the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, it's interesting for us to go back and look at what people are saying now. We have people who were there at the time making speeches. There was a very interesting speech at a Second Amendment rally just a year or two ago. A guy that was at Tiananmen Square that now lives in America. He was talking to gun owners about the importance of having firearms. He said, both your founders here in this country, as well as Mao, understood that power comes out of the barrel of a gun. That was Mao's quote. But Mao also said that he was going to control the firearms. And this is what else that fellow had to say at that rally in Massachusetts.
23 years ago, I was a freshman year college in China. And I was exercising my freedom of speech and assembly in Tiananmen Square. At that time, much like we're doing today, we grew frustrated by the governmental corruption. We grew frustrated by the limitation of personal freedom. So we demonstrated peacefully. However, the young passion and patriotism were crushed by hails of metal jackets by the AK-47s. Or some of you would say that's actually technically Type 56. We could not fight back because we did not have an inch of iron in our hands, to borrow a Chinese expression. We were not armed. Gun owners like us often say the Second Amendment is the protector against a tyrannical government. Some would argue that a man with a rifle has no standing against the military technology and machine of today. However, I would say that 20 million citizens in Beijing sure wish that they had some rifles to dispense at those days. Do you know that Chinese Constitution guarantees almost all the nice things that we have here? It is written in Chinese Constitution that Chinese citizens enjoy freedom of speech and religion. They have human rights and property rights, and such rights cannot take away without the due process of the law. And do you know what? Chinese people do not have the rights to keep and bear arms. I assure you, all those nice things written on Chinese Constitution are not worth the weight of the paper they're printed on. Because when government has all the guns, they have all the rights.
Absolutely. When government has all of the guns, they have all of the rights. You hear the list of things that are recognized in the Chinese Constitution. It sounds just like ours, doesn't it? But when you don't hold people to the law, when you don't hold government officials to the Constitution that they swore to, we devolve into something no different from the Chinese Communist government. Now, one of the things he said there is, I said, well, people say that you can't use weapons against state-of-the-art military, that it's not going to be effective. And he said, well, what if 20 million Chinese had small firearms? Remember that when there was a standoff in the Warsaw Ghetto, originally the Jews that were there didn't have any firearms. They got a hold of a few sidearms, and with that, they held down a Panzer division for quite some time, for several weeks till they burned them out. But I really want to focus on the First Amendment, because that is still a very powerful thing, although it is guaranteed by our Second Amendment rights, which act as a deterrent. And we saw that act as a deterrent at Bunkerville, at the Bundy Ranch standoff. I was there. And every time I have gone, every time since I've been here, that we've had a demonstration that InfoWars has been a part of, if people were simply carrying weapons, not using weapons, there haven't been any weapons used, but if people have weapons on them, the government behaves very differently. The one time that I've seen out of the 4 where we've had a tense standoff like that, the only time where people were attacked was when there was nobody that was armed. It is a very effective deterrent. But CNN, as they're going back and looking at this, they're kind of patting themselves on the back, talking about the CNN effect. In other words, when they're there filming what's happening, it kind of pulled back the Chinese government. They were there covering it live, and after that, people started to talk about the effect that a free press, an honest coverage of an event had in terms of stopping tyranny. Now, of course, eventually they were not there when the government moved against the demonstrators. They eventually got tired of that, just as they did at Waco. And I want to look at how they have completely suppressed what happened there for 25 years. You know, for more than 25 years, the government as well as the mainstream press was able to cover up the fact that Bilderberg even existed. It's been almost, I guess it's been about, what, 22 years since Waco? We've seen the government cover up many of the things that have been done there, even though there have been documentaries. Most American citizens have not gone back and revisited what happened there and looked at those documentaries. We've seen 9/11 now. We're 12 years into that. That has completely remade our legal system, and yet most people don't understand many things about that in spite of very good documentaries that have gone out. One of those, especially that Alex was involved in Loose Change. 50 million people have watched that. But many people are still ignorant of what's going on with that. And as I read in the last half hour, they went back 8 years ago and talked to students at the university where the Tiananmen Square protests began. They had no idea what this picture of the guy standing in front of the tank was. But I want to talk about the fact that it's not a CNN effect. It's a First Amendment effect. You know, this is where CNN is bragging about the fact this is a watershed story for them. This is where they really took off, where people really started paying attention to them because they were going 24 hours a day. And, of course, CNN did have some good work earlier this week. They were covering unrest in Turkey, and they had a journalist there. His name is Watson, no relation, I guess, to our journalist, Watson. But he was hassled and he was arrested. He courageously covered these stories that were going on there. And yet we've also seen another side to CNN. We've seen that when they were going into, when the Iraq War was beginning, we saw them fake reports that were supposed to be live on site with gas masks, a very funny video that we've shown over and over again here at InfoWars. We have seen that they shut down, the people who were higher up shut down Amber Lyon when she exposed anti-government rallies in Bahrain. She eventually left CNN because of that censorship. She said, I couldn't believe CNN was making me put what I knew to be government lies into my reporting. So they can be real, they can be fake. I saw them at their worst. As an example of the control of the American media, I saw them at their worst at the Bundy Ranch standoff. They showed up a couple of days after we got there. They were there for one day, as far as I could tell. They were not. There's that, for anybody watching it, there's that clip of where these guys were performing in the studio back in Atlanta, pretending that they were on site in Iraq and pretending that there's incoming gas masks going. This is totally fake, guys. But going back to the Nevada Ranch standoff, they went in, they came in with a CNN truck, planted it front and center on the second day that we were there. They went around and they started trying to find the fringiest people they could so they could do character assassination on the people who were there. They failed to show up at this showdown. They considered that it was all finished because they'd been given information by their government controllers that they were going to allow Bundy to now graze his cattle, but they were not giving his cattle back. So the people that were there went down to get the cattle back. I was standing there, and I listened to the lies and the disinformation that were fed out by CNN, fed out by people like Glenn Beck. CNN interviewed Bundy later on and called him a welfare queen. They completely misrepresented his arguments. They didn't make the arguments for what he was doing, but they also completely misrepresented what happened during that standoff. When they had him on, they said, so are you some sort of a welfare queen and a cowboy hat, is the way that they came after him. That is what we've seen, a pattern of behavior that we've seen over and over again. This goes back to the 1950s, to Operation Mockingbird that was created by the CIA to control the press. We've seen this in spades at Bilderberg, and that's why we want to talk to Daniel Estulin about that aspect of free press, the fact that there would be no coverage on the outside while the heads of large media organizations like the Wall Street Journal, like the Washington Post, like the New York Times would meet privately inside of Bilderberg with these world leaders. At the same time that they were meeting with them, they would pretend that it didn't exist. They would ridicule and laugh at the early investigators like Jim Tucker, Daniel Estulin, Alex Jones, who had exposed this. They pretended that it didn't exist. But let's look at how in the Tiananmen Square event, I want to get behind some of the things that have come out behind the story from the people who were there, the soldiers who were there. Now, the first thing that most people remember, the main thing that most people remember, is that courageous fellow who stood in front of the tank. And as this ABC News article said, they said, little is known about the man who blocked the path of the column of tanks in Tiananmen Square 25 years ago. He's been called Tank Man, the unknown rebel, the unknown protester. Nobody knows what happens to him. Now, there's been some reports that he smuggled his way out. He got out to Taiwan. Cold water's been poured on that by a lot of the protesters and journalists who were there. They don't believe that that's what happened. Personally, I think that a fellow like that was probably front and center when the killing began. I doubt that he made it out of there. And so, but I look at that and I think about the tank driver. You know, when we were at Bunkerville, there were people in the White House, at least one person, suggesting that they use drones on those people who were there. When we were criticized for having women and children in front, which didn't happen, by the way, that was a supposition of a retired sheriff, Sheriff Mack, who said that. That did not happen. Sheriff Mack was not even there. There was no plans to do that. It, in fact, did not happen. I was there. I was walking with those people at front. That absolutely did not happen. But we were harangued about that. But even though we were there, even though we stood that down peacefully, we were criticized as being the provocateurs, as being the dangerous ones. They took a picture of one guy who was pointing a weapon, and they ignored the fact that we had weapons pointed at us the entire week, that they were pointing weapons at us at that time, that they were threatening over a loudspeaker to shoot us if we didn't go back. I look at this, though, and I'm grateful that they didn't give that order to use drones. I'm grateful that the soldiers and the BLM contractors that were there, that they didn't fire. they would have been remembered as murderers. That would have set off a chain of events that would have been huge. That did not happen in Tiananmen Square. Instead, eventually, they did fire. Eventually, they did what this person, this is someone who was a 20-year-old student. This is the parents of a 20-year-old student who was among the first to die. And they said he was shot in the head, in the shoulder, and in the chest by advancing troops, and then he was deliberately skewered through the belly with a bayonet. He was one of hundreds, perhaps thousands of Chinese citizens that were slaughtered during that period of time. Now, in spite of that, there is collective amnesia in China 25 years after Tiananmen Square, according to the LA Times. They say that they give examples of people who are now under house arrest. This is the way that they are keeping this quiet. They control the press, they control the textbooks, and they control the dissidents. Every year, one of these participants who's continued to live in Beijing, every year about this time of year, he is put under house arrest and not allowed to go out. It says that the government has long determined to impose a collective amnesia about the weeks-long pro-democracy demonstration that shook cities across China 25 years ago. They're controlling it American style now. Instead of going in and putting this down with troops who are shooting and killing people, running over them with tanks, now what they do is they silence them by ignoring it, by censoring the information. This guy who's under house arrest says, I think we need another June 4. That's what they call it. They don't call it Tiananmen Square like we do. He says, I don't mean we need another incident full of blood. I mean we need millions of people to go to the streets and to demand change. That gets their attention. When people showed up to protest the banker bailouts on 9/12, when the Tea Party showed up en masse in Washington, that got their attention. We haven't seen anything like that before or since, but we need to follow through on that. We need to understand that we can peacefully turn this back. And we need to also understand that soldiers can peacefully turn this back. Now, another quote here from the LA Times, it says, in 1989, the Communist Party tried to lock the doors of major campuses and universities so that students would not take to the streets, but they still found a way out. After 1989, they found a way to lock their thinking, to lock their minds. That's what one of the demonstrators that was there. And they said that locking comes from a powerful cocktail of materialism, cynicism, and nationalism, fostered by the party's headlong embrace of a market economy and government-sponsored patriotic education campaign. See, that's the way they've bought their silence. They bought their silence by giving them economic prosperity and telling them that you can have that, but you cannot talk about politics. How far away are we from that? We see that our government is trying to censor politics. We see movements, and we're going to talk about that right after we come back from break. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about movements to create shielded journalism as well as to amend the First Amendment, which came out this week. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we've just been talking about the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, and I said I wanted to get behind the scenes. I wanted to hear stories from the Army's side. And there was an article from the New York Times 2 days ago, and they had a quote from one of the generals. He was called in and told that they wanted him to use his troops against civilians there, and he refused to do it. He said, I would rather be beheaded than to be a criminal in the eyes of history. That is a choice that American soldiers are one day going to have to make. We know that the American military has targeted domestic dissenters as terrorists. We know that they were planning for this in their scenarios. We've walked the streets. InfoWars reporter, I was there with Staff Sergeant Joe Biggs. We walked through a town that they have built specifically to practice for martial law. This is not after they've gone in with the Air Force and blown up an area with shells of buildings that they're taking over. This is an area where they still have all of the glass in the buildings, the traffic lights are still working. They're going in and practicing taking over a town that in every detail is an American town. And they have one that the Marines are using down in Camp Lejeune as well, that has suburban areas, that has farm areas. This one that we went to, and this is file footage that they shot, we were actually able to go in and walk those streets a couple of weeks ago. That is what they're preparing for. So they're going to have to determine someday whether they're going to just stand down, as this general did, or whether they're going to stand up to the tyranny. That's what he did not do. And I want to read you a quote from one of the soldiers that was there. He was only 17 years old at the time. He was with a group of 10,000 soldiers. Again, this is from the New York Times. He said that for 3 days, there were weary, marooned soldiers who clutched their rifles in the wilting sun. He recalled how residents and students would bring them food and escorted them to toilets, all the while bombarding them with a message that theirs was a just cause. Even in the restroom, there was no reprieve, he said. If one student would go hoarse yelling, another would take his place. So this is a group of soldiers. They're surrounded. This is 10,000 soldiers, but they're surrounded by many, many more people who were telling them what this is about, trying to educate them. Well, what happened was the government was concerned that these troops are going to join the people, so they pulled them out of there, and they sent the soldiers to a re-education camp. And for 10 days, they said, former soldiers said they were fed a confusing diet of indoctrination at their encampments on the outskirts of Beijing. They studied the speeches of Mr. Ding, who was the leader there. They were told that the demonstrators were the work of a subversive minority bent on toppling the Communist Party. Sounds very much like the way they portray the Tea Party in America now. You have to educate yourself. You have to understand, and you have to understand where your compass is. What are your fundamental principles that you're going to stand on? And will you stand down or will you stand up to this type of tyranny when it comes to America? And then finally, to look at how they have suppressed this information over the years, what does it take in order to do that? Well, it takes control of the means of communication. And we see that this is happening in America now. We've got the FCC asserting its ownership over the internet. We see that they are probably going to allow Comcast, the #1 largest provider of information in the United States, controlling the pipelines as well as much of the content, to absorb the #2. That would be Time Warner. If that happens, and that's combined with a removal of net neutrality, what you're going to have is effective censorship. If people cannot get broadband without paying extra for it, if some outlets, independent outlets, cannot afford that, their voices are not going to be heard. When we were at Copenhagen, there were many individual journalists there. Those honest journalists, those real journalists, they will be swept aside in a regime where there is no net neutrality. That's what they're working on. They're also working on even fundamentally changing the First Amendment. That's what Democrats are suggesting, Democrats like Chuck Schumer. We're going to talk about that right after the break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. In this hour, we're going to be talking to Daniel Estulin. He's one of the reporters who for years followed and reported on Bilderberg as it was ignored, censored, and his coverage was ridiculed by the mainstream media, who leaders were there at Bilderberg meeting inside. At the same time, they were spiking stories about it and ridiculing anyone who reported on it. But this all brings up what is happening with freedom of speech as we look at what happened in Tiananmen Square 25 years ago as people stood up for their rights, and how the Chinese government has been able to suppress everything that has happened there, as the students from the University of Beijing have no idea what this picture of the man standing in front of the tanks is about. Is it an art piece? Was this a parade? They don't understand. That's their questions. Can that happen here in America? I believe it can. I believe it has happened here in America. We've seen numerous examples of it. Bilderberg is just one example of it. We've seen disinformation and lies about many things that happen domestically. Even though the American press may honestly cover things that are happening in other countries, they will cover up and feed the government's line out about these things that are happening domestically, as we saw at the Nevada ranch standoff. They completely misrepresented not only the history, the background, and the beef that the Bundys had, no pun intended, with the removal of the cattle there, but they also misrepresented what happened that day. Now, when we look at what's going on with the First Amendment, one of the ways that they're going to control the First Amendment, besides going through the FCC, controlling the pipes, allowing mergers, changing net neutrality, using the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership Agreements to enact CISPA, SOPA, PIPA, ACTA, those kinds of restrictions on the First Amendment. They're going to enact those through these partnerships, and that's what I wanted to talk to Daniel Estulin about, because that is essentially what's been planned by the Bilderberg Group for decades, that kind of economic control of information. But now we see that Democrats are suggesting that perhaps the First Amendment needs to be modified, that they need to put restrictions on what people can say politically. Now, we see that one of the supporters of this idea is Democrat Senator from New York, Chuck Schumer. He says that no amendment is absolute, he says, not even the First Amendment. He says, of course, we've got restrictions on pornography and libel. Those are part of a balancing test. Well, he knows, or should know, and I'm sure that he does know, that pornography and libel are not political speech. What he's trying to do is suppress political speech. The First Amendment was not set up to protect somebody putting a crucifix in a vat of urine, but it was set up to let us have unrestricted comment about what's going on politically. And in these decisions from the Supreme Court that the Democrats are reacting against in Citizens United 1 and 2, in my opinion, what was happening there was them standing by the fact that political speech is an absolute, and we should not have that taken away by having our ability to pay for that political speech taken away. I know at least in Citizens United 2, that was a case that involved very small players. This was not the Koch brothers. But if you think that the Koch brothers have too much influence, then what you need to understand, take a look at the history of the RICO statute. The RICO statute took away people's ability to defend themselves through due process. They realized that the mafia was repeatedly getting off of charges because they could hire the very best lawyers to get them off. So they decide, well, the way we're going to handle that is we're going to confiscate their financial assets, their ability to defend themselves in court at the beginning. Now, originally, they used the RICO statutes only against the mafia, but then they started using it against abortion protesters. Now we saw, just a few months ago, there was a Supreme Court case, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court allowed this. They said that even though there was a couple that was accused of stealing medical devices, taking out a loan on their home to pay for their legal defenses, that the prosecutors could confiscate that money prior to their being convicted of anything, depriving them of the means of their self-defense. So if you're going to take away due process for the mafia, you're going to take away due process for mom and pop who are accused of something. If you're going to take away freedom of speech for the Koch brothers, you're going to lose it yourself. Now stay tuned. Right after the break, we're going to be talking to Daniel Estulin. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. This hour, we're going to be talking to Daniel Estulin, a man who has researched for years and written a book on the history of the Bilderberg Group. He was ignored for many, many years, and so we're going to talk to him about how it felt to be a voice crying in the wilderness that was ignored or ridiculed for what he reported. But, of course, as you know, if you're a follower of InfoWars, we were there last week as the Bilderberg Group was meeting in 2014 in Copenhagen. And one of the people that I had the pleasure to talk to was a former member of the Danish parliament. His name is Ole Gerstrom. And this is what he had to say.
And so it gets out in the newspapers, in the television, etc. And then we have the whole control system. If you look at the controlled press, what we can also easily see here in Copenhagen, although everything here looks peaceful, calm, we have a controlled press. We can see that in many aspects, like how they cover 9/11. You know, 9/11 is a subject which is not to be talked about.
That's right. Do not question the official story. That's right. He understands that they have a controlled press. He's a member of parliament. He's seen it. I've been places. I report on what I see, and I see the way the mainstream media lies about it. Media that weren't even there. That's what we saw at the Nevada standoff at the Bundy Ranch. Now, an Australian news source, ABC, but it's not the American broadcasting system. It's the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. They reported on Tiananmen Square, and they said decades ago, the party decided that the best way to deal with this painful history, that would be Tiananmen Square, hurt, death, division following an attack on unarmed civilians that its own leaders ordered, that the best way to deal with this history of Tiananmen Square was to simply pretend that it didn't happen. That's been going on for a long time about a lot of different issues. Bilderberg is just one of those. And so we join on the line now with Daniel Estulin. Daniel, are you there? Yes.
I'm here. Thank you so much for the invitation. As always, it's great to be on the show. It's one of my favorite programs, Prison Planet television and web pages. You have to understand it and watch it if you want to know what's going on in the world.
Well, thank you for joining us, Daniel. I want to first, before we talk about some of the things like the agenda, and maybe any new news that you've got there. I'd like to talk to you and just give us your feel about what it's like to be covering something for decades, as you did, as Jim Tucker did, and to have it completely ignored by people, by the press especially, or to be ridiculed.
Again, my book, I think I'm a bit of an exception to this particular case, because my book, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, when it first came out in the United States in 2007, it had already sold over 3 million copies in Spain. And now, 10 years later, Bilderberg, my book, has sold almost 7 million copies in 64 or 66 countries, has been translated into 42 languages. And, I think I'm in part responsible for the fact that Bilderbergers now have their own webpage, and they publish the information about the meetings and about the attendees list. But that said, it's obviously true that the mainstream press in the United States and the world over doesn't cover these events. Now, media control and media manipulation doesn't mean that you have a monolithic big brother serves up one and only one distorted version of reality. Now, the media cabal defines the parameters of what is news, and therefore it shapes the latitude of the public discourse and also the range of policy options available for the debate. So it continuously disinforms and misinforms and basically dumbs down the population. And what's imperative to understand is that no matter which media outlet you read, watch, surf, or listen to, whether it's New York Times, Washington Post, the media in Europe or in Asia, or, it doesn't matter where, the entire mainstream and most alternative news sources are controlled by the same interlocking devices that attend organizational meetings such as the Bilderberg, Trilateral Commission meetings, Council of Foreign Relations, etc., etc. Again, mainstream press forms part of the world's elite. They're part of this juggernaut, which is why, again, if something of value or interest does come out in the mainstream press, is because or they have simply no way of covering up, or they need to serve up an alternative perspective to get people diverted from the reality that media sources such as yourself and Alex Jones and PrisonPlanet.com explain and put out to the world.
I think that's a very important point that you brought up. It's not like there's some ministry of truth that's setting over everybody. I mean, there is, just as we see at the Bilderberg Group. Wouldn't you say there's kind of an inner core of people who really do have common values, and they kind of use this consensus creation technique, kind of like the way they do at Agenda 21 meetings here in the U.S. They use kind of a Rand Corporation technique where they bring people in and they kind of test them to see if they can get them to buy into the consensus. If they can't, like Margaret Thatcher, then they get rid of those people. But if they can get very powerful people to buy into this, to believe in, and to join this consensus, then they become part of that group. They start coming back year after year. And essentially, I think that's what's happening with the mainstream press as well. They very quickly get the idea, even though they will come in occasionally, like they did with Amber Lyon, and just spike a story. People understand what they want to be covered and what they don't want to be covered. Wouldn't you say that's the case?
The greatest form of control is when you can manipulate the population into believing that they're free while they're being dictated to and manipulated by the men behind the curtain. And of course, one form of dictatorship is being in a prison cell, seeing the bars. You're there, you can touch them. But the other is a far more subtle form of dictatorship, is when you cannot see the bars and you think you're free. And of course, the biggest hypnotist in the world is that box in the corner of plasma or whatever you want to call it, that basically tells people what to believe. And the television, with its reach into everybody's homes, basically has created this reality, alternative reality for mass brainwashing of citizens. And this has been one of the greatest forms of creation of control by the man behind the curtain.
Yeah, the ability to make people think that they've arrived at this consensus decision based on their own thinking rather than being manipulated into that. And that's what we see with this Delphi technique. They bring people in, they subtly control the agenda, control what's presented to them, just as the media and even the media that is showing fictional stories, they will present a range of choices to them and gradually steer them to make the right choice, wouldn't you say?
Basically, television, what it does is it causes people to suspend their critical judgment capabilities, because the combination of sound and images places the individual in a dreamlike state, which basically limits their cognitive powers. And when that's done, you're creating an alternative reality, and that's what public opinion is all about. And that's why, Americans who think that they're basically governed by some bureaucrats in Washington, who make laws and hand out money. But that's wrong. Americans are ruled, Americans, Canadians, Europeans, everybody, society, we're ruled by our prejudices, and their prejudices are organized by public opinion. And so we think that we make up our own minds about everything, okay, because we're very conceited as people. And public opinion makes up our minds. It works basically our herd instinct, like we're frightened animals, okay? But there's a very big difference between a man and an animal, and that's something that most people, unfortunately, don't understand.
Very true. Now, let's talk about some of the information that you got prior to the meeting, the leaked secret agenda. We reported on this May 30th. Kit Daniels wrote this up. There were 7 large items that you talked about. Have you gotten any more information besides this? These were, let's just read these for the people who are listening. The number 1 was nuclear diplomacy, Russia and China, even Iran working together to erode Western hegemony. An agreement between Russia and China on many different economic aspects. The rise of nationalism within Europe, and of course that happened just before the Bilderberg meeting. There were elections throughout Europe for the European Parliament, and those who were standing for a stronger European Union were rejected decidedly in elections in one country after the other. The European Union's internet privacy regulations, that's something that is, I see that coming about via the Transatlantic Partnership Agreement, just as Americans are going to be hit from both sides with both the Transatlantic and a Trans-Pacific Partnership where they take away our internet freedom. The rise of cyber warfare. Of course, we had Keith Alexander. We had former head of the NSA. We had General Petraeus, former head of the CIA. We also had companies like Palantir, Alex Karp that were there. Those guys have been there multiple years. I would say they've probably bought into the consensus. Would you say so?
Absolutely, Tom. You know, again, I'm still sifting through all the information I got from my sources, but I can tell you there's several issues. We can talk about Ukraine. We can also talk about the Russian and the Chinese agreement. There are some points of disagreement between the American and the European Bilderbergers. And what you just mentioned, the TTP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, basically, you know, the idea is to put businesses in driving seat, allowing them to bypass the World Trade Organization, and also give transnational corporations a power boost, largely eradicating the influence that respective governments have on trade. In other words, again, the whole concept of one world company, limited corporations, was far more power than any government on the planet. Now, if you kind of look at what was actually discussed, now one of the organizations most responsible for this tremendous growth, right, in the world hunger we can start with, is the World Trade Organization, which was created after the Second World War by internationalists in Washington to serve as a wedge to kind of push free trade among major industrial nations, especially the European community. Now, if you kind of read their publicity and the propaganda, the World Trade Organization established a framework for creating non-discriminating reciprocal trade policies. Now, the reality is very, very, very different. The WTO's anti-national state intent can be really seen in their 1988 slogan, "One World, One Market." And that slogan came from GATT, General Agreement on Tariff and Trades.
Hang on, Daniel Estulin. We're going to be right back to talk about Bilderberg, and that's what we saw. I tell you what, a free trade agreement, you don't need thousands of pages of documents negotiated in secret to get free trade if that's what you really want. There's another agenda.
You know
we'll be
about
right
RVs?
back. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I have Daniel Estulin, tireless researcher on the Bilderberg Group, author of The History of the Bilderberg Group, and on the phone. And we're talking about what happened last week. We're also going to take your calls on Bilderberg. If you have any questions, this is the guy to talk to. He's been following this for decades, even as the domestic press and the international press pretty much pretended that it didn't exist. Daniel Estulin, Jim Tucker, Alex Jones, and others were still on the story, covering it. And if you have questions for them, questions for Daniel, we'll be taking that in the next segment. You can call 800-259-9231. That's 800-259-9231. For those callers that have been waiting, we want to talk to Daniel about Bilderberg. So if you could hold your call, if you want to call back on another day, we'll try to put you at the front of the list, or we'll take your calls in overdrive. But for those of you who want to talk about Bilderberg to Daniel Estulin, that number is 800-259-9231. Now, just before the break, Daniel, you were talking about the World Trade Organization. We really see these agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Partnership, they pretty much mirror the Trilateral Commission's goals of uniting first regional economies under things like the European Union, under NAFTA, and then pulling these all together into a global governance. So we now see those trade partnership agreements as essentially formalizing that into law, into treaties. Would you say is that what they're working on? Is that one of the major agendas?
Within the World Trade Organization's regulations, nations are basically prohibited from protecting local economy or tax goods, even when these goods clearly were produced with slave labor. And furthermore, nations are not allowed to give preferences to local economies that hire local people at decent wages to produce goods that then benefit the local businesses and economies, people who pay taxes, played by the rules, and also reinvested this, money into the local and national markets. The truth is, free trade is rigged trade, and the fairness question is basically diversionary propaganda for deluded lawmakers and the public. It is run by an international financial cartel, and this cartel interests, they control the playing field, who plays, and the rules of the game. And when you expand the cartel's control into strategic areas such as food, for example, the situation gets serious in a hurry.
Yeah, and as I look at these agreements, for example, multinationals are elevated to the level of sovereign states, and yet local businesses, people who live and work in countries, they don't have a voice in this. And I think it's also amazing how these trade partnerships are being created in a secretive environment that essentially mirrors the way Bilderberg operates. No one who is elected, no senator, no congressman from America or any of these other countries is allowed to see the documents as they're being created. The only thing that we have from these secretly crafted documents that are being worked on, the only thing that we see is what comes out from WikiLeaks. And we see that it affects a lot more than just economic trade. It affects our freedom on the internet. It affects our ability to decide what we want in our food, or whether or not we're going to have information about what's in our food. Of course, they want to be able to censor that in other countries, just as Monsanto and other corporations have been able to effectively censor information about the content of food here in America.
You brought up a very interesting point about as far as corporations and what they're doing, exactly how they're controlling the trade. Now, during the 1968 Bilderberg meeting in Montreal in Canada, George Ball was the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs with JFK and Lyndon Johnson. He gave a presentation titled Internationalization of Business, where he defined what the new Bilderberg policy of globalization was going to be and how it would shape the policy of this international new world order. Because when we're talking about Bilderberg, we're not talking about one world government, new world order. We're talking about the concept of one world company limited. So in this 1968 Bilderberg conference in Canada, George Ball, who at the time was of Lehman Brothers, he announced a project to build what he called the world company. And the idea is that nation states, they were outmoded. There are archaic forms of government. So in a Malthusian world, they can be relied on to, for example, because again, tend to believe that the resources in the country belong to them instead of to the people. So they created this new form of government, and they call it a corporation. And the idea will be that this world company would then become the new government. And if you kind of look at globalization, that's exactly what this is. Beginning in the 1960s, and then into the 70s and the 1980s, the United States and the rest of the world was literally taken over by this rush of mergers, larger consolidation of industrial companies, agricultural companies, financial companies, and they were slowly building these giant cartels, to the point where we see now today these giant cartels which control the resources of the world, effectively run the world. So this is what this concept of world company project literally is all about. And if you kind of think about the fact that they proposed it as their key point for the future back in 1968, that's 45 years ago.
Yes.
It should be scary, or should scare the hell out of anybody.
And we've now seen that pretty much in every sector you care to think about. Look at the massive consolidation of whether it's the banking industry, whether it's communication business, or whether it's even retailing, how it's all consolidated, pushing out the middle-class business owner. We're going to be right back with Daniel Estulin and your call. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and I have Daniel Estulin, tireless reporter about the Bilderberg Group. He's had many inside sources. We're going to have questions for Daniel from our callers about Bilderberg. We also want to find out if he's got any new information. He released 7 items that he believed from his insider sources were going to be on the agenda, so we want to see if he has any more information about that. And we're going to talk to him also about China and the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square, because China is a key player in the globalist taking over the industrialized base of the West and moving it to China where they can more easily control it. But before we do, I want to put in our pitch here, because this is what pays for us going to these different places, whether we're going to Copenhagen to cover Bilderberg or whether we're going to cover the protests in Nevada. what pays for those trips, what pays for our ongoing expenses here as a media operation are the products that we sell. And it's something that helps you as well as helping our organization. Now, as we've talked about many times, the globalists are digging in. Alex has repeatedly said on the show that they're moving up their end game. The day is coming where they're going to take over the food supply, where they're going to contaminate the food supply to the extent that you won't be able to find anything to eat. We have a very fragile infrastructure here. It doesn't take much to collapse that. But patriots everywhere are getting prepared. They're doing it with MyPatriotSupply.com, which offers high-quality survival gear and is the home of the Patriot Pantry line of emergency food storage. It's delicious, easy to prepare, put together with GMO-free crops, storable for up to 25 years. My Patriot Supplies develops space-saving, secure food storage bins, unlike the flimsy plastic pails that you find almost anywhere else. Visit MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex today for special offers. That's MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex. The globalists are counting on you to be unprepared, so fight back. Get prepared at MyPatriotSupply.com/Alex today. Now, we want to go to some callers and take their calls, but just before we do, I want to ask Daniel, what do you make of these 25 years with Tiananmen Square and how the globalists, how Rockefeller has admired Mao and the Chinese communists, how he spoke in glowing terms of them, even after the Cultural Revolution starved millions of them, perhaps tens of millions of them, completely eviscerated the middle class, the sorts of things that we see could possibly happen with contamination of our food supply by the large corporations, or the kinds of things that are coming out of Bilderberg. Daniel, did you want to say something about China today?
I wanted to, because we are talking about the 25th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. Now, to most people old enough to have seen it on television, the Tiananmen Square student protest in Beijing in June 1989, shrouded in the image of the CNN, this lonely protester with a shopping bag, dressed in a white shirt and black trousers, blocking a column of tanks. Yeah. What few people realize is that Tiananmen was an early attempt by the United States intelligence to interfere in the internal affairs of People's Republic of China, and also to implement what later came to be called color revolutions. You could also call them made in America coups. Similar color revolutions were later run by Washington and Serbia against Milosevic, in Ukraine with the so-called Orange Revolution, Georgia's Rose Revolution that unseated Edward Shevardnadze, and also other geopolitical destabilizations aimed at creating Washington-friendly regime changes. It has very little to do with, with popular protests. It has nothing to do whatsoever with spontaneous revolutions. There's no such thing as a spontaneous revolution. These are well-planned, very expensive revolutions or coups d'etats made in America.
Yeah, that's what they were talking about at Bilderberg. I'm sure they were talking about what's going on in Ukraine. And we've had admissions by the State Department that they have spent billions of dollars to get that started in the Ukraine. And now they're going to be spending over $1 billion. Obama has pledged that to the Europeans, that he's going to give them $1 billion to essentially provoke a new arms race and a new Cold War. That's what's going to come out of this. I'm sure the military-industrial complex is going to love that.
Well, I can tell you that, there's some very interesting discussions going on at the Bilderberg conference. Now, we've talked, the last time was on Alex Jones' show just before the meeting, that one of the agenda items, obviously, we didn't even need Bilderberg to tell us that, they were going to discuss the whole deal with Russia and the Chinese, but the point was how to keep Putin in place and away from causing damage to the international globalist order. Now, the European and American Bilderbergers this time around, for the first time since 2002, went at each other's throats to a certain extent. Back in 2002, Jim Tucker reported it back then, they were at each other's throats for the whole thing about the upcoming war in Iraq. This time around, it was China and Russia. Now, the European Bilderbergers were saying to the American Bilderbergers, okay, you want us to impose sanctions? We did. And now, not only did we impose sanctions without any effect whatsoever, but the Russians and the Chinese, through the back door, made a deal. And this deal is worth $400 billion. It's an enormous gas deal. So what are we going to do now? Because in the end, if you want us to impose more sanctions, the European Bilderbergers are saying to the American Bilderbergers, it's going to hurt our economy, not you. And the Americans are saying, we need you to stay stay together with us because we need to hurt Putin. Now, there's some silver lining to this deal because, again, on the one hand, Bilderberg does agree. It's a nightmare scenario, China and Russia working together, and now Iran also joining the fray. So you have China, Iran, and Russia working together. It's a very difficult deal to sabotage, the China-Russia gas deal, because you cannot get to the actual pipeline because they're so far inland that they cannot be sabotaged. And needless to say, it's a deal which came in just in time for Putin. It shows, on the one hand, that Putin does have allies, to seek to blunt Western sanctions over Ukraine. It also helps both Russia and China to assert themselves as regional powers. That said, American Bilderbergers, we don't know them by name because in the Bilderberg reports, we don't have the names. It just says American Bilderberger, European Bilderberger, member of French political circles, and so on and so forth. What we do know is that what American Bilderberger said, or reminded the rest of the people at the meeting, that over 40 years ago, Richard Nixon and Kissinger were able to persuade China to turn against the Soviet Union and ally with America. And so then they asked this rhetorical question: so does today's collaboration between Russia and China amount to renewal of this alliance against America? Now, what is absolutely certain, as Bilderberg has agreed, if Western banks stop lending money to the Russians, the Chinese banks will step in and lend Russians the money. Now, the Chinese badly need the natural resources which Russia has in abundance. And this gas deal obviously eases China's concern that most of its fuel supplies comes through the strategic choke point of the Straits of Malacca that Americans can close at any point if there are real hostilities between the United States and China. And this deal also enables China to move away from burning so much of its coal that pollutes the air in the Chinese city. Now, despite that, these are obvious advantages for the Chinese and the Russians. The Russians and the Chinese have some very important differences which they need to overcome. And one of these differences is the fact that Bilderbergers are convinced that the Chinese, taking advantage of Putin's predicament, drove a very hard bargain, knocking down the price, something which left the Russians with a bad taste in their mouths. Now, another thing is that the Central Asia, Russia and China, that's their area of influence. Now, the Chinese want the Russians to recognize China as the global powerhouse in the economy, and the Russians want the Chinese to recognize them as the military power. So we do have these tensions which the Bilderbergers were talking about. Yeah. And it's interesting to note that, when push comes to shove, you have this enormous border between the Russians and the Chinese. On the one hand, on the one side, you have lots of natural resources and few Russians, and on the other side, you have no natural resources and lots of Chinese. And as one American Bilderberger reminded everybody in the room, that many of Russia's tactical nuclear weapons are still pointing at China. So again, what we will see in the near future is that Bilderberg and Western powers and Western media are going to try to play up China against Russia, try to drive a wedge between these two countries. But I think if Putin and the Chinese governments are smart, they'll stay together because they realize that temporary gains by joining the United States are not worth long-term losses.
Fascinating analysis. I want to give the callers a chance to ask some questions. Let's go to Anthony in Florida. Anthony, do you have a question about Bilderberg for Daniel Estulin?
Hello?
Hello, Anthony. Do you have a question for Daniel Estulin about Bilderberg?
Actually, I have a comment.
Okay.
I think that the globalists are actually becoming quite sloppy when it comes to conducting their policies against everyone else, because before they were in the shadows conducting it, and now it's as if they're losing their way as far as trying to dictate policy on everyone else.
Well, that's interesting because certainly there's been a massive revulsion about what was the European Union and the Euro, and of course that was by admission of Etienne Davignon. That was something that was planned by the Bilderberg Group. But now that people have seen how that's working, how that's been implemented against them, how they have lost their sovereignty, there's been a massive revolt against that throughout Europe. Wouldn't you say, Daniel?
What we have right now, especially with the rise of nationalism, in England and France and in other parts of Europe, now some of that nationalism is pure fascism, that's obvious. But others, such as the case of Nigel Farage with UKIP in England, or Marine Le Pen in France, this is not fascism at all. These are nationalism. And what we actually have, and this is something that Bilderberg and European community are very much concerned about, is we have two systems and going at each other. And depends which system wins, we'll see how the world is actually going to shape itself or play itself out in the near future. Now, one system is the monetary system, and the other one is a national credit system. Okay, now if you're smart, you don't want a monetary system to run the world. You want a sovereign nation state to have their own credit system, which is the system of their currency. And of course, this is firmly stated in the United States Constitution. And of course, it was excluded by the Maastricht Treaty as a method of determining of economic and financial policies. And needless to say, what we're seeing right now, okay, in Europe is exactly this. And it's insane to belong to this kind of a group, because in Europe, you don't have any kind of credit system. It's all a monetary system run by this banking system, which is European Central Bank, needless to say, belonging to Bilderberg and all these other organizations. There is no government, there's no nation, it's just a group of nations run by a private bank. And of course, what we're seeing right now, okay, the supposed independence of the central bank is the decisive control mechanism for private financial interests, which historically in Europe has been installed as an authoritative instrument against an economic policy of sovereign governments oriented towards the general affair. And of course, the European banking is a remnant of a feudal society in which private interests, as typified by the ancient Venetian cartels or by the Lombard League, which went down in the Dark Ages in the 14th century. And this is what we have today, again, two systems: the monetary system, which controls Europe, and the national credit system, which you have in the United States, and something which exclusively and expressly was excluded from the European negotiations.
And we've seen that with Nigel Farage was very eloquently pointed out how amazing it was that Goldman Sachs bankers could be used to replace duly elected leaders in both Greece and Italy, and people in those countries are waking up to that as well. Let's take another question from Mike in Louisiana. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Knight. David, I have a question for you, and then Mr. Estulin. The first one is kind of lighthearted, but I'm a artist activist, and I have designed a Clive and Bundy for President T-shirt that I would love to gift you. So
I would like that. You know, when I spoke to him personally, he reminded me a great deal of Ron Paul, and he had a Ron Paul Ron Paul sign there in his yard. He reminded me very much of Ron Paul. I would vote for him over anybody that's been offered to us by the traditional parties over the last few years. Of course, you know, they oppose Ron Paul and people like Clive and Bundy. Go ahead. What's your question for Daniel Estulin?
How could I get that shirt to you, and how can I be assured you'd receive it?
Well, I'll tell you what. Hang on after the call, and we'll try to get the fellows here on the board to give you that information. I don't want to give that out over the air, but or actually, you could send it to the P.O. box that's at our website to my attention and get to me. That'd be fine. I'm sure that would.
All right. I'd also like to get that other information just to make sure. I'd like confirmation on that. Now, if I could ask Mr. Estulin a question, please.
Sure. Go ahead.
Mr. Estulin, I read your book. It's excellent. Some years ago, and I congratulate you on your work and your tenacity and exposing the Bilderbergs. I'd like to ask: do you think it'll ever get to a point, because of the exposure due to you and the late Mr. Jim Tucker? Do you think it'll get to the point where the Bilderberg will stop meeting, or maybe find some other clandestine way to go ahead and go about their devious methods?
I think it's important to put Bilderberg in perspective. Organizations such as Bilderberg Trilateral Commission, Council on Foreign Relations, Penai Circle, these are not the seats of power. They're the conveyor belts. The real decision-making process is always and has always been, taken and done at much higher levels. The thing is that, when my book came out, suddenly people discovered Bilderberg, because before that, we kind of knew that, someone was doing something to someone, it was a coup d'etat, someone was, taken out or killed and somebody else was put in their place. You had price machinations and shenanigans going on behind the scenes, but we didn't know really who was doing it or how it was done. And then when my book came out, suddenly these they, who were nameless and faceless, had a name and a face, and we knew what they were doing, and we knew their deeds, and we saw the documents and the photographs, and it was easy to say, aha, these are the bad guys. But they're not the bad guys in a sense that one understands a bad guy from a Hollywood film. again, the real decision-making is done at a much higher level than Bilderberg. Bilderberg is mid-level executives. Yes, there are some very powerful people because they're powerful because they're popular. Someone like a David Rockefeller, for example, you may say that he's very, very powerful. He's not. The fact that there's 100 million pages with Rockefeller's name on Google doesn't make him powerful. It makes him popular. Yes, he's wealthy, when you compare it to us. But no, he's not wealthy or powerful when you compare it to the people who run the world from behind the scenes, because the real people who move the world from behind the scenes, they're invisible. We don't even know their names. That's how powerful they are. There's a difference between power and popularity. Rockefeller is powerful, but he is visible. The real power is invisible. And I can give you one name, Frescobaldis, which is the root of all the royal families in Europe. Now, if you actually go and Google their name, you may get a couple of pages, and they're talking about their wine exports. And in Rome, there's a tiny little plaza, that has their name. But these are some of the most powerful people in the history of mankind, and nobody knows their name or the fact that they even exist, because they don't appear in the newspapers. They don't have, community centers. They don't have buildings named after them. They are invisible, but they're omnipotent when you compare it to the people that we're talking about who attend Bilderberg conferences.
Thank you very much. Let's go to get another question from Julio in Illinois. Julio, you have a question for Mr. Estulin.
I do, Mr. Estulin. Buenas noches, usted, and as someone who studied journalism in college, you really influenced me to go from sports reporting to investigative journalism. So, muchas gracias a usted, señor. My question, I've been looking, I listened to you last week, and you mentioned in one of the agenda points that they're going to be discussing is climate change. And I was wondering if you could elaborate, if you can, a bit on what they're going to be, what their plans are with that. And I know you mentioned about the Russia-China natural gas deal that they just made, and I think you had mentioned something that the Bilderbergers were upset, or at least maybe the Europeans were upset at Obama not pushing the Keystone Pipeline here. And something tells me that...
Hang on, we're about out of time. We've got to go to a break, but we're going to be back right after the break, and we're going to get Mr. Estulin's comments on climate change at Bilderberg. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight. I have Daniel Estulin, famous researcher about the Bilderberg Group, on the line. We've been taking calls from you about what his information is about this year. And one of the things that was on the agenda was climate change and its deindustrialization. Before we get his answer about that, I wanted to let you know that this half hour of the Alex Jones Show is brought to you by Survival Shield X2. That's one of our products at InfoWarsLife.com. It's much stronger than the regular Survival Shield through a unique manufacturing process that utilizes sources from deep within the earth. A unique new process uses high purity grade of iodine from more than 7,000 feet below the Earth's surface, below the Fukushima wave. It's extracted from 200 million-year-old salt solution that yields a powerful and uncontaminated 650 micrograms of iodine per single drop. Tested with radiation readings at the labs to ensure freedom from Fukushima radiation. That's Survival Shield X2, available at InfoWarsLife.com. Now, Mr. Estulin, you had a question just before we went about climate change and its involvement in deindustrialization and what the people at Bilderberg were talking about.
I haven't gone through, there's extensive information from my sources, literally passed me all the information which is discussed at the meeting, and I simply, with all the interviews I've been doing worldwide, because I'm getting calls from 30 countries, I have not had a chance to actually read that information. I haven't gotten to it yet. I can tell you what they've discussed as far as the Ukraine is concerned. We've talked about their oil and gas deal with the Russians. I can tell you what they're talking about. The controversy between Angela Merkel and David Cameron as far as the appointments of the Lisbon Treaty, but very little thus far as the climate change. I will know in the next few days.
Tell us about David Cameron, because we saw Ed Balls there. He had a huge amount of paperwork that he was bringing in to the Bilderberg conference. He got carded, and he didn't have his identification with him. As he was searching through his luggage, we could see a massive amount of paperwork. And, of course, he's from a different party than David Cameron. What's your information about David Cameron?
Well, you have, the partisans, you're talking about, again, European Union. The partisans on either side are pushing Angela Merkel and David Cameron to the fight that neither one of these wants. Now, the nasty mess of the possible appointment of Jean-Claude Juncker, who's the president of Luxembourg, ex-president of Luxembourg, as the next president of the European Commission. It's all too predictable. Now, the origin of the whole trouble lies in the 2009 Lisbon Treaty, which basically changed the procedure to select the new president of the Commission, and that replaced the European Constitution, which was scrapped in the name of this Lisbon Treaty. Was just a bait and switch trick to impose this pan-world, pan-European laws and regulations on the community of nations, which have very little to do with one another. It's very interesting to see over the next little while what's going to give, because needless to say, in England the situation is critical. You keep one, they destroyed all the other parties. Their position is very, very strong. They're pro-nation state, pro-social welfare, and we're seeing the same thing going on in France. And the idea, again, that behind this fight, there are two financial systems. You have the monetary, and you have the nation-state credit systems. And depends on who wins. It also depends very much whether we're going to have a referendum in England over the next couple of years, before the next elections in 2015, or not.
Let's take a call from Lee in Tennessee. I want to give him, we're almost out of time. Lee, what's your question for Mr. Estulin?
I was wondering if you all have ever heard the Illuminati are covering up UFOs because they're scared that the light speed travel will end the world with terrorists blowing up the planet.
I didn't understand the question.
I didn't either. Could you repeat?
I was wondering if you all have ever heard that the UFO cover-up across the planet has been done to keep light speed travel out of the hands of everybody because they fear that like the planet will end because terrorists blow.
I don't know anything about the UFOs. It's not my area of expertise. I know zero about it.
Neither do I. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Estulin. We're out of time, but hang on for those of you listening on our webpage or on our internet feed. We're going to go into overdrive. We're going to take some of the callers who were holding earlier, and we're going to try to take their questions. But that's it for Mr. Estulin. He has to go at this break. Thank you very much for joining us, Daniel Estulin. Welcome back to the Alex Jones Show. I'm David Knight, and we're going to go in about 5 minutes into overdrive here, trying to take some calls from people who waited a very long time. We had to put them on further hold to take some calls about Bilderberg for Daniel Estulin. And one of the people who's waited a very long time is Catherine from Virginia. Catherine, go ahead. Thank you for waiting so long.
Honor to speak with you, and thank you for what you did out west and helping that family.
Well, thank you. We were happy to do that, and thank you for supporting us, because without your support, we couldn't do that sort of thing. What was your question or comment today?
Well, my comment was I hitting point by point, as Alex and your organization has pointed out for years, the demonization of veterans, the purge of the military command, the VA scandal, Bergdahl scandal, and I can't help but think there's been a lot of talk about, I think the mainstream media is turning on Obama and they're reporting about this. Well, I have another take on that, if you'll bear with me. I believe that this is a deliberate provocation of the military and other patriots to exercise emotions to a boiling point so that they can pull off a false flag and then blame it on veterans or patriot groups who were provoked to anger by the ineptitude of the president. And further, 5 years ago, I was the Republican nominee in the 99th District of Virginia, and this will all tie together. If you can bear with me, I'll try to be
Sure, go ahead.
I was contacted. The first district is a massive waterfront district bordered by the Potomac and the Rappahannock River. At any rate, I was contacted by some retirees up in Montrose, Virginia, who were upset because O'Gara was moving into their community, and apparently they had greased the skids of the Board of Supervisors to approve them as a school. That's how they got into the district, and they were upset, worried about environmental concerns. And a lot of these were government retirees, so they had, very well-educated people, and they had been doing their homework. And as the Republican nominee, they wanted to know where I would stand on this issue. And so they started to describe to me what their research had turned up. And they told me that their research had turned up that Obama had given the DynCorp $1 billion contract And that contract involved establishing these schools in within 2 hours of Washington, D.C. And so they described where some of these schools were set up, and they're coming from a completely unconscious place, not related to what I'm thinking, because I'm seeing a perimeter in my brain around Washington, D.C. of private contractors. Fast forward to that midsummer at my booth in my local hometown where I had the Republican Party had a booth set up. And I didn't realize till later that this person was spying on me. This person was wearing a Blackwater T-shirt. Long story short, he'd been sitting behind our booth for hours. I was really unconscious, not expecting such a thing, and so I asked him if I could bring some water to him. He had a little dog.
We're almost out of time. We're almost out of time. Yeah.
I said, "Oh, you're with Blackwater," and so I engaged him in conversation, and I talked about O'Gara in Westmoreland County, not a question, but a statement saying, "So you're setting up a perimeter around Washington, D.C. What's that for?" He said, "Well, it's for a situation that our military won't be able to handle." Anyway.
Well, we certainly know that they're preparing for a lot of different things. As those who've watched us know, we went through the place where they're preparing in Virginia, as well as another one that they've got in North Carolina. They're preparing for civil unrest and for martial law. And that's a good point. They may be deliberately trying to provoke veterans with this trade. That's it for today. Thank you for joining us. Join us tomorrow at 11 Central.
Hi.